Boogie, if you were Trae Young and you heard that most of your team was available to be traded and you know how talented you are, what do you think? How would you feel? How have you felt in those kinds of situations?
If I'm Trae Young, I get ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
It's obvious. It's obvious that his talent is good enough and strong enough to, lead this young team to at one point Eastern Conference Finals. So the talent is there. The part about sports that bother me and that I basically hate and it's overlooked a lot is the responsibility of these organizations. They're not always on the same page with their superstar players. Sometimes they have superstars and they just completely mishandle them. And the situation I'm afraid of with Trae Young is he'll remain there too long, and then all of a sudden he becomes the villain. He's the scapegoat. I know from experience, and I know how these organizations work. Once things start to crumble, once things start to fail, the blame game starts. And it usually starts with the player first. And in most cases, I take that back. It usually starts with the coach first. Then it's the player's fault. And then on and so forth. So obviously they've moved on from a coach in Nate McMillan. They've now brought in Quinn Snyder, pretty established guy in this league. The politics come into play. And like I said, once this thing continues to crumble, it's going to be Trae Young's fault to be the villain. And then that's when that whole game starts. So if I'm Trae Young, I'm getting out as soon as I can. Find you an organization or a situation that's ready to put your talents on display and actually put a winning culture and a winning program around you. So where that situation is, I can't say right now. It's definitely some takers, but Trae Young has to move on, and it's what's best for him as an individual and his career and his legacy. So that's my advice to Trae.
So there's a couple of things going on. Number one is, Rachel, I'm gonna bring back a throwback. If the instructions say you got to bake the cake for 400 degrees for 40 minutes, that don't mean you can crank it up to 800 and then be done in half the time.
Yep.
That's what happened in Atlanta. They went to the conference finals. Look, they had a great playoff run, but that regular season, they were an average team. They were a lower seeded team. And they hit a good stride in the playoffs and got to the conference finals. But we knew, all right, y'all ain't really it was just, you had a good run. But then they behaved like they were that good. And that goes from the front office not making the necessary adjustments and additions. And that goes for even Trae Young. If you remember that next season, he was talking about, the regular season is kind of boring to us now. I'm like, no. You're not the Warriors where you've been in the finals 5-6 years in a row and you can say this is boring. You had a good playoff run, but this is the work, right? So everyone kind of fell for it, and then they came back down to earth to who they were. The other part of it is exactly what Boogie's talking about. And Boogie, you know it better than anybody. When you think about your time in Sacramento, how many GMs, forget about how many coaches you played for, how many GMs you had? Now you look at Atlanta. There you go. Two owners. That's new. That's new, right? But if you look at Atlanta, Travis Schlenk was the GM. He's out. Now Landry Fields is the GM. Coach, yes, we mentioned Nate McMillan. There was Lloyd Pierce before that. He butted heads with two. So you got 3 coaches and 2 GMs. Folks, if the organization is unstable, you can't ask this guy to save it, right?
Nope.
LeBron, KD, there's a handful of guys who even in an unstable organization can bring it all together.
Can overcome it,
Right.
But for the majority of star players, you can't overcome an unstable organization. And Atlanta has been unstable until they can say, this is what we're about. This is our culture. We stand by it. You got to buy in. And then start to bring in players who fit that idea. It's always going to be like this. They're good sometimes, they're bad sometimes. And like Boogie said, at the end of the day, the people who get blamed are, number one, the coach. We got to get a new coach. But then number 2 is going to be the star player. You wasn't good enough.
Yeah. And look, there's already a report out there. Matt Moore, NBA reporter, said that, Trae Young's camp, his agent, has made it known he wouldn't be opposed to a trade. So, I mean, the little bits of seed sowing and ground softening are starting to come out a little bit. I mean, I get it if you're a trade. Do you want to sit through another 3 or 4 years while the organization gets it back together, especially if they're going to trade away DeJounte Murray, if they're going to trade away some of these other guys? I mean, I guess it depends on who they're getting back. But at some point, he's 25 years old. I think he sees the rest of the league, and he and Luka will always be tied because of that draft, sort of moving on without him. And I'm curious to see what happens there. And if I'm the Hawks, and I really am going to see a bunch of these other guys walk out the door, they're not going to have a great rest of the season unless they get something back that I don't expect. And then is Trae's trade value going to be diminished, especially if he gets frustrated and there starts to be friction. And then it's like, oh, Trae is a problem again, because you know how that sentence works. I don't know. If you're going to make a big move, maybe you make the big move now while his value is so high. I mean, there's a lot of teams out there that need that level of player. That would be a game changer if he was on the open market for a lot of teams. So I'm curious to see what they do.